said goodbye to Leicester in a very emotional way and thus ended one of the most mythological tenures of a player at a club. From being discredited, playing in amateur football, to winning the Premier League title, in an unforgettable story because Leicester was a strong relegation candidate but surprised everyone and achieved the ultimate glory in its country. There are impressive titles, but few tell a story as sensational, unbelievable, and full of iconic moments as this one. This is Immortal Teams, Leicester, the Premier League champion. To tell this story, it's worth remembering why this achievement is so special. Every year a team wins the Premier League, but when we think of the champion, usually the first thing that comes to mind are the big ones, the Big Six of England. So we have those who have been winning titles recently, like Liverpool, Manchester City, and Chelsea, the sleeping giant Manchester United, which hasn't won the Premier League since Ferguson's departure in 2013, and Arsenal and Tottenham, who haven't won the league, well, for a little while now. Tottenham knows it well, but both are generally fighting up there in the table. Beyond that, there are also historic English clubs that haven't won the league in a very long time, like Everton, Aston Villa, and Newcastle, for example. And in the midst of all that, not fitting into any of those categories, is Leicester. The club was founded in 1884, initially as Leicester Fosse, and has always been a small team away from the main trophies, having even spent most of its history in the second division, going up and down between the first and the second, the famous Yo-Yo Club. That was Leicester's story, and it's very similar to many other small and mid-sized teams. They kept going up and down divisions and even flirted with bankruptcy. And in some ways, that's still true. The Foxes still stumble and have dropped to the championship once again. And when we get there in the 2013 to 2014 season, that was the situation. Leicester had just won the English second division after a long time, but their stay in the first division was threatened. Since at the end of the 2014 to 2015 season campaign, Leicester was at the bottom of the competition, about to be relegated once more.
Nice ball, Paulinho, Eriksen's available. Here's Eriksen to wrap it up. It's there. Surely now all 3 points will go to Tottenham.
It was the 30th round when Leicester lost 4-3 to Tottenham, and stuck at the bottom, they were 7 points away from escaping the relegation zone. The team's fate seemed sealed. They were surely going to play in the second division next season. Everyone thought so, and the statistics proved it. No team in the history of the Premier League had stayed in the top division with fewer than 20 points in the first 29 matches. And Leicester had only earned 19 points. But that's where the first miracle of this story comes in, and the first unforgettable moment. A run so spectacular and unexpected that it became known in the club's history as the Great Escape. Led by veteran star Esteban Cambiaso and Jamie Vardy, who wasn't around for that long, who often played as a left winger but started to get more minutes as a forward, Leicester notched 4 straight wins to defeat West Ham, West Bromwich, Swansea and Burnley, jumping straight out of the relegation zone. To understand the craziness of it, they had scored 19 points in 29 games. In these last 4 games, they scored 12 points. In an unbelievable way, since that time when they were at the bottom, they have simply won 7 of their last 8 matches in the Premier League. And they not only managed to avoid relegation, but finished in the 14th position in the league, breathing a sigh of relief, not just for staying in the top division, but with their confidence through the roof. Cambiaso said goodbye to his first and only season with the English team in a heroic way, winning the Foxes Player of the Season award and leaving with some idolization from the club, even after just 1 year. Even though he did not stay to be part of what was to come next, it is no exaggeration to say that Cambiaso was fundamental for everything that was going to happen, because the title of 2015 to 16 cannot be explained without the Great Escape of 2014 to 2015. Obviously, Leicester started the season as a strong relegation contender. and it's certain that the club's goal was once again to remain in the Premier League, fighting against relegation to stop being a yo-yo club and become more established in the top division. But this incredible final stretch of the previous season ended up being a teaser of what was to come. Little did Leicester fans know that the next season would be one of the most legendary campaigns in the history of football. Despite the great finish to 2014-15, coach Nigel Pearson was let go, and in July 2015, another well-known football figure arrived to take over, Claudio Ranieri. At the time, Ranieri was seen as a bad, uninspired signing, and some commentators even said he was really lucky to have gotten a job at Leicester. Many believe that Ranieri was already in a bad phase of his career, and that therefore a job in the Premier League, even in a club that had fought not to be relegated in the last season, it was like he was falling upwards. Still, no one could deny Ranieri was a legendary coach. The Italian started his coaching career back in the 1980s with successful stints at Fiorentina, Valencia, and a brief period at Atletico de Madrid before taking over Chelsea in the year 2000. He stayed there for 4 years and became the Premier League runner-up and reached the Champions League semi-finals in the 2003-2004 season. But he couldn't win anything and was later replaced by Jose Mourinho. The rest of his career ended up being a bit more disappointing, with stints at Valencia, Juventus, Roma, and Inter Milan, unable to make a mark or win anything. And so Ranieri took over Monaco in 2012, which at the time was in the second division but had already been bought and was looking to restructure. In Monaco, he managed promotion to Ligue 1 and finished the following season right behind the leader PSG, but despite that, he ended up being dismissed from his position. A Monegasque official mentioned that at this stage of the project, we need to find a new dynamic, and that he wanted a team that would put on a show on the field. In other words, a subtle way of saying Ranieri was outdated, and that sort of held true. Ranieri's next job was with the Greek national team, and it was a complete disaster. It was just 4 games without any wins, and after a defeat to the Faroe Islands, Ranieri was once again sacked. With all this history in mind, you can better understand why he faced so much criticism when he was hired. Ranieri was considered a coach who had already left his best days behind and who took on job after job without managing to do any that were really good and relevant. And the worst part, coming directly from a Greek tragedy in charge of the national team. But Ranieri's start at Leicester soon turned out to be much better than expected, and his style already began to show in the way he dealt with the team. He was that real fatherly type, a coach who liked to motivate the players, found ways to do so, and rewarded them for their victories. So for example, in the first game of the season, Ranieri was inspired by the Premier League's opening song at the time, Fire by Kasabian, and he told the players, when you go on the pitch and you hear the song Fire from Kasabian, think you are warriors. And this motivation resulted in a 4-2 victory over Sunderland. A few games later, Leicester was already in great form in the Premier League and was high up in the standings, but the team conceded goals in every match. So before a match against Crystal Palace, he made a different kind of promise to the players. I told them, if you keep a clean sheet, I'll buy pizza for everybody. So you know that idea of the strict coach who bans any tiny drop of alcohol for the players, and that after a victory don't want to know anything else, just think about the next game. Ranieri is not like that, and after that promise, the team went there and defeated Crystal Palace 1-0. The team didn't concede a goal, and Ranieri kept his promise, also saying that pizza is good for the muscles. And if the Great Escape was the first landmark moment, and perhaps the foundation of everything that was built afterwards, the second key moment we can say is pizza and champagne, because it represents how Ranieri handled this job and motivated the players. If there was any doubt that Ranieri would succeed at the club, that doubt quickly started to fade. Not just because Leicester wasn't fighting relegation anymore, they were competing at the top of the table with the big money giants. And if before Ranieri had the nickname Tinkerman because he used to constantly change his starting 11, now in Leicester that's not the case. He found a core team that almost didn't change. The established team played in a 4-4-2 formation. Kasper Schmeichel was the goalkeeper, son of the legendary shot-stopper Peter Schmeichel, a Man United idol. But back then, he was still unknown to the football world and had been at Leicester for a few seasons. On the defensive line, Danny Simpson was the right back, probably the most limited player on the team. The central defenders were made up of the tall Robert Huth, who was great with aerial balls, and the leader and captain Wes Morgan. Besides having Christian Fuchs on the left back, mainly being a good defender who didn't let anything get past on the left side of the field, but also had a great pass, which would curiously define the future of his career. We'll talk about it later. Leicester played with two midfielders, Danny Drinkwater alongside the energetic N'Golo Kanté, another player who was still unknown in football. Coming from Caen in France, Kanté had a very humble and difficult childhood in Paris before graduating from Boulogne. And like the other heroes in this video, he also went through third and second divisions until reaching the English elite, and he complemented his midfield partner very well. While Kanté was more of a box-to-box player, a guy who carried the ball and covered the whole field to mark, steal the ball, and then carry it to the attack, Drinkwater was the guy who took advantage of the quick counterattacks of the Foxes to drop a ball up front, switch plays, and make great passes. He had an excellent long pass, and of course, we're talking about the team that came together during the season and became known as the foundation of this Leicester. But eventually, there was a change or two, and even at the very beginning, for example, midfielder Andy King was a starter. He who had a very strong connection with Leicester because he's a product of their academy and went through the whole journey to rise and win the third division. After winning the second division, went through the Great Escape and was also part of the 2015 to 2016 squad. But in that campaign, he obviously lost his place to Kanté, and on the left flank, they had the solid Mark Albrighton, while Albrighton was the guy more focused on being a fast winger who was very dedicated and sometimes delivered wonderful crosses. Mahrez was a wide playmaker who either dribbled down the wing or cut inside to create chances with his amazing dribbling skills and a very sharp left foot. And this already gives a hint of how that team used to play. It wasn't a team that would dazzle anyone, but it also wasn't a totally defensive team. It was a team that defended in order to win the ball and burst out in fast and usually very effective counterattacks. A very direct team so that the ball can fly to the feet of the attackers. Speaking of them, up front, the duo was led by Shinji Okazaki, a striker who mostly played a supporting role. He was that guy who just kept running all game to open up space for his teammates, basically pressing the defenders the whole time, and mainly freeing up space for him. The fast, decisive, charismatic, and great name of this team, Jamie Vardy. Vardy is one of the players with by far the most interesting and overcoming journey in world football. Born in Sheffield, he came up through the Sheffield Wednesday Academy but was released around age 15 or 16 for being too small. It's an age where wonder kids are already emerging, and Vardy was being released by the modest Wednesday, going to stop at the even more modest Stocksbridge Park Steel that played in the Southern Division of the Northern Premier League, which is roughly between the 9th and 10th divisions in England. At that time, Vardy was incredibly happy, earning the equivalent of £30 a week. He began in the reserve team of the glorious Stocksbridge, but he quickly became part of the main squad, helping them get promoted. Then in 2010, he moved to Halifax Town, who were playing in the 6th division. And look at this craziness. To have Vardy's services, Halifax paid a total of £15,000. A value that doesn't even pay for Yamal's shin guards was enough to hire Vardy at that time. At this moment, the man had already started scoring goals left and right and thus continued climbing the league, then going to Fleetwood Town the following year. Where he was the top scorer, he also took the guys to the 4th division and thus managed to catch the attention of a 2nd division team, Leicester. At the time, the Foxes paid around £1 million to sign Vardy, which was a record amount for a player from outside the top 4 divisions. Today we know it turned out to be the best signing in the club's history, but it wasn't all sunshine and roses. Vardy's start ended up being very complicated. The difference in level from the 5th division to the 2nd division made Vardy struggle, and after a few goals scored, There were even some who wanted him out of the club, with the manager Nigel Pearson at the time having to convince him not to leave Leicester. And it's a good thing he stayed, because in the next championship he scores a bunch of goals and the team gets promoted to the Premier League. When in the 2014 to 2015 season, Vardy was struggling again. In the elite of English football, it seemed like he was out of his league, making it clear that maybe he was a level below the top division. A guy who had been a star in the lower divisions, but was flying under the radar in the Premier League. That seemed to be his fate at that moment. But if Vardy went goalless for most of the campaign, scoring 1 goal in the first 25 Premier League games, he was even benched in some matches, but he was one of those responsible for that miraculous save at the end of the season, with 8 direct goal contributions in the final stretch, which helped Leicester avoid relegation. It was as if during the miraculous escape something clicked for Vardy, something fell into place, and not just for him. It seems this happened to the whole team, and going back to the 2015-2016 season, Vardy's goals and Ranieri's motivational techniques were working too well, and the team that was once seen as a contender for relegation suddenly reached the 13th round, leader of the league. It was unbelievable, but the truth is that the Foxes were taking advantage of their rivals' mistakes and were simply resting at the top of the standings. And this, of course, is largely due to Vardy's incredible form. And it's not just slightly incredible, we're talking about incredible and historic record-breaking. Starting in the 4th round, Vardy scored against Bournemouth, then against Aston Villa, then against Stoke, then scored twice in the defeat to Arsenal, scored again against Norwich, got 2 more against Southampton, and kept going, scoring against Palace, West Bromwich, Watford and Newcastle, to then get close to a ridiculous record. A record that belonged to the legendary Ruud van Nistelrooy, the only player who had scored in 10 consecutive English Championship matches. Look at how many stars the Premier League has seen. From Alan Shearer to Rooney, Cristiano Ronaldo, Thierry Henry, Aguero, Harry Kane, and it was Jamie Vardy, who not long ago was in divisions that were almost amateur, that managed to break this record.
This is the left back, Fuchs. The ball in behind Damian Vardy! It's 11! It's heaven for Jamie Vardy! A Leicester player has smashed the record!
In his 11th consecutive game, Vardy scored a goal. He went to heaven and dethroned Van Nistelrooy in a game that was crucial for Leicester not to be overtaken by Manchester United in the standings. This record by Vardy, which remains to this day, is certainly one of the highlights of this campaign. It was a dream start to the season, straight out of a fairy tale, but everyone knew it would end at some point. That's because almost every season start in some league, there is a small team that manages to start very well, make some noise, but eventually can't keep up the pace, can't manage to stay at the top. And the impression everyone had of Leicester at that time was that Leicester was like the so-known turtle on a fence post. No one knew how it got there, but surely at some point it was going to fall. And honestly, it was obvious. What were the odds of little Leicester actually winning the Premier League? 5,000 to 1. Well, when we talk about odds and probability, betting houses are experts at cashing in on that and obviously taking your money. And at the start of the season, the betting houses gave the odds for each team to be champion of the Premier League, with Leicester's being 5,000 to 1. Basically, this meant that for every pound bet on Leicester winning the Premier League, if that happened, it would return £5,000. An outrageous rate, which was basically another way of the betting house saying it is impossible for Leicester to be champions, or almost that. And it's obvious that Leicester could not be considered one of the favorites for the title, not only because they came from an almost relegation, but they were far from being one of the wealthiest teams or with the most investment. In that season, Leicester was only the 15th English club that spent the most on signings. For example, the most expensive signing of the season was Okazaki for 11 million euros, while City brought De Bruyne for 76 million, nearly 7 times more. A value that was greater than all of Leicester's signings combined. So remember that 5,000 for 1, it made total sense. In the next round, even without a goal from Vardy, another convincing win put the Foxes back at the top of the Premier League. Meanwhile, none of the other teams that were close behind, Arsenal, City, United, and Tottenham, showed consistency in the competition. The next match was against Mourinho's Chelsea, and guess what? Vardy scored a goal with a wonderful assist from Mahrez and an amazing goal from the Algerian himself, so they can later also beat Everton and remain in the lead. We can't dive deep into everyone on this team, but it's worth taking a moment to talk about Mahrez. How well he played this season is unbelievable. He is one of those low-profile guys that Leicester made famous since he arrived in 2014 from Le Havre, where he was far from being a well-known and hyped guy. He had only played in Ligue 2, the second division in France, and then went to the Foxes, who were still in the English second division. Mahrez's debut in a first division was during the 2014 to 2015 season, participating in the Great Escape and then shining in the 2015 to 2016 season. For the whole world to know his talent in that magical season, magical like Mahrez himself, who was the bow, creating plays for Vardy, and was also the arrow because he also liked to score his goals. Of course, besides doing what statistics don't show, playing top-notch football with dribbles and truly impressive moves. In the absence of a number 10, Mahrez was more of a right winger, the team's playmaker, often moving more towards the middle to manage to find a wonderful pass. If he and Vardy were playing really well and everything was going right, there came a moment when the pessimists' predictions started to come true.
In particular, what they might do, Leicester with three forward, couldn't convert, but Leicester City, the Premier League leaders, fall at Anfield.
This is because they will face Liverpool at Anfield and lose 1-0, ending a 10-game unbeaten run. Then, they draw with Manchester City and end up being overtaken in the table by Arsenal on goal difference, which finished the year as the leader of the Premier League. And we know how important this statistic is. Often the team that leads at the turn of the year ends up being the champion in the end. Then in the next match, another draw for Leicester, with Vardy nowhere to be seen and Mahrez missing the penalty, and Arsenal then taking the lead in the league. Right there, many were already saying goodbye to Leicester. It was over. The firewood is gone, the gas is gone, use whatever metaphor you want, but this story we've seen before. A small team that dares to dream, but in the end, just hits a brick wall. But this time, things would be different, and Leicester would turn a fairy tale into reality. It's in those moments of difficulty that you often see the strength of a team, whether they will succumb to pressure, whether they will really let the tough times consume them, or if they will keep their heads up fighting until the end, if the will to win will overcome the fear of losing. And it happens that in this Leicester, Ranieri had a lot of trust in his two main stars, and the team quickly responded. In round 21, they were facing Tottenham at White Hart Lane, and a victory for the Lily-Whites would not only leave Arsenal alone in the lead, but would also keep Spurs very close. And if the talents didn't show up, right at the end of the game, Fuchs takes a corner and the big defender Robert Huth doesn't even lift his foot off the ground. He just makes the heading movement and scores a placed shot with his head, being decisive and taking a 1-0 victory home. It was a big boy goal, a goal from a team that says we are indeed fighting for the title. This was confirmed in the following challenges: a draw against Aston Villa and a 3-0 victory against Stoke. And then the feared match against Liverpool, which in the first leg had been one of the only games that Leicester lost this season. But this time the story would be different, and it came with one of the most beautiful moments of the season.
High ball over the top. Vardy is chasing it. Thinks about the shot. Henderson! Henderson! David Vardy!
Leicester's very own fantastic Mr. Fox.
The goal was remarkable not only because of its beauty, but also for showing what that Leicester was capable of. With the ball from the back, he quickly found himself in front of the goal, playing with a lightning-fast counter-attack that exuded confidence. Then Vardy scored again to make it 2-0 and cement their spot at the top of the table. An incredible goal by Vardy that surely goes down in history as the goal of the season, and a beautiful thing. They had defeated the giant Liverpool, but would face Manchester City next. It was the kind of game to distinguish a team that was just having fun in the league from a team that really aimed to be the champion. Even at the Etihad Stadium, once again, the star of the big defender Huth shone. He scored 2 goals, and Mahrez also scored with a brilliant goal where he does a step over and sends a powerful shot. And Leicester, with the victory, opened a 5-point lead at the top of the Premier League. I clearly remember freaking out when Mahrez scored that goal because it was a game that was really emblematic of that campaign. For me, probably the game that represents the turning point for that Leicester. That game, that victory, made even the skeptics start believing. Even those who thought Leicester would inevitably fall at some point started to think, well, this team might actually become champion. It felt like something unimaginable was happening right before our eyes. I remember following it at the time, and every round we thought, man, it's not possible for them to keep going like this. But they just kept on going, and suddenly, especially after that game against City, everyone was wondering who will doubt Leicester now. And the answer is Ranieri. Ranieri was doubting Leicester, or at least that was the way he treated it publicly. Ranieri, even with the team leading the championship, dealt with victories as if the team were fighting to avoid relegation.
If you are still top of the Premier League after these 2 matches, then will you believe that you are Premier League title contenders?
I hope 40 are the target, no?
So one of the great insights from the Italian that worked for this Leicester squad was to take the pressure off the guys. Instead of the locker room having that obligation to be the champion and suddenly feeling all the pressure of a game in which they do not win, Ranieri took a different path.
We play without pressure because we don't have to win the league. We must enjoy.
In a masterstroke, he took that whole narrative about the team not being the favorite, having only a 1 in 5,000 chance, and used it to his advantage. Well, weren't we supposed to be fighting against relegation, so anything above that is a bonus? This thought, without a doubt, helped the team to keep playing freely and relaxed, without succumbing in the championship when they faced a tough time. Not even a loss to Arsenal shook the team's spirits. In many cases, teams in these moments start to shake when they see the Sharks, and getting closer in the standings, Ranieri was able to both motivate the players to keep doing what they were doing very well and also relieve the enormous pressure that could make everything crumble at any moment. From then on, Leicester didn't lose anymore. They had some draws, it's true, but a streak of narrow 1-0 wins, those famous victories of a championship team indeed. The Fox increased their lead with more and more points, reaching the 33rd round. 7 points ahead of Tottenham and favorites to be champions. Who would have thought the underdogs, once contenders for relegation, are now favorites to finish first? And so, after scoring a 2-0 against Sunderland, with 2 goals from Vardy, Leicester was now qualifying for the Champions League for the first time in its history. And from there, it was just waiting. They scored a 4-0 win against Swansea and came to the game against Manchester United knowing that a win would secure them the title. The win didn't come, they tied. However, after this match ended, Tottenham would face Chelsea. And if they didn't win, Leicester would be champions from the couch watching on TV. With thousands of Foxes fans in England and millions of football fans around the world hoping Spurs bottle it.
Costa, away from Alderweireld, Diego Costa, Eden Hazard! Glorious goal! Leicester's goal!
They ended up just drawing with the Blues, and so in a very anticlimactic way. It's true, Leicester achieved the incredible, the unimaginable, the impossible Premier League title for the first time in its history against all odds. The squad had gathered at Vardy's house to watch the Tottenham versus Chelsea match and root against Spurs. And together, there they went completely crazy celebrating, and you can be sure there was a lot of pizza and a lot of champagne because those guys really deserved it. An incredible campaign with various charismatic characters who would become key figures in English football in the coming years, and they were born right there before our eyes in this great campaign. Everton, a routine victory for Wes Morgan to lift the trophy and for the fans to be able to sing the champions chant. That wasn't stuck because it had never been sung and the supporters never thought they would sing it one day. And to reward the unstoppable engine of this team, N'Golo Kante, who was even a bit shy during the celebration to appear and without the courage to ask to hold the trophy, he was called to the front of the stage and the rest of the team gave him the trophy so he could lift it with that beautiful, wonderful smile of his as always. This achievement not only crowned the work of Kante, Morgan, Huth, Vardy, Mahrez, Schmeichel, Ranieri and the rest of the cast, but it also became a consecration of all the stories of unlikely teams that perished along the way. Leicester's title was more than a Premier League achievement. It was a victory for the underdogs, a comeback story, from those who started from the bottom to make it to the best league in the world, and to show that if there's at least a 1 in 5,000 chance, it's that chance you have to hold on to. You have to run and dedicate yourself to make it happen. Leicester's title, more than a trophy, is proof that everyone has the right to dream, and that football is a magical sport. It's fantastic when you see before the match an old lady with a Leicester shirt outside the stadium. I was on the bus, I saw them, unbelievable, and I want to say thank you for the support. They are dreaming and we want to continue to dream. The former Leicester player and now commentator Gary Lineker said at the beginning of the season that if Leicester won the championship, he would host the TV show in just his underwear. Well, Leicester won the championship, and Lineker in his underwear, yeah, is something you won't be able to unsee. Once the thrill of victory passes, life goes on, and it is even difficult to digest how quickly football forgets things. But really, after the celebrations, there's a competition again. It was the year of the Euros, and then another Premier League starts all over again from scratch. But how to follow up a season like that? It leaves the impression that nothing ever will be as extraordinary as what Leicester did. So anything different from surpassing this achievement, which maybe for Leicester would be winning the Champions League the following year, kind of wasn't enough. It's very hard to return to reality after waking up from a dream. And many times with smaller teams that manage to have great campaigns, we see the squad being completely dismantled. But with Leicester, that did not happen. The only major departure was N'Golo Kante, who went to Chelsea. The rest of the starting team stayed the same. But despite that, what worked in the previous season just didn't click in the new one. In the Champions League, Leicester advanced by leading their group and defeated Sevilla in the round of 16, without a doubt a historic campaign for them. But despite putting up a hard fight, they ended up losing to Atletico in the quarterfinals. In what would be its first and to date only participation in the Champions League, in the Premier League, after not being able to repeat the feat and seeing the team fighting to avoid relegation, the man who worked the miracle, Claudio Ranieri, was sacked. The team ended up not being relegated. Ranieri's assistant coach Craig Shakespeare took over in the previous campaign and managed to save the club's season. But it's curious how a team that only lost 3 games in a championship suddenly had lost 14 by the middle of the season. It's hard to believe that after leading the guys to the title, Ranieri would be sacked, but the truth is that the work was not the same anymore. And after the happy ending, then came a bitter taste. The hope that the title could elevate Leicester as a new member of the Big Six, or open up to become a Big Seven, was totally gone. And that old situation of a club fighting to not get relegated every year has ended up coming back. Reality started knocking on the door, and gradually the title-winning team began to break apart. The fullback Simpson did not have his contract renewed, Wes Morgan and Huth retired, besides Albrighton, who stayed at the club for several more years before hanging up his boots. Fuchs went to the MLS to try to become a kicker in the NFL, while Drinkwater went to follow in Conte's footsteps at Chelsea. But while Conte became a legend there, winning the Premier League in his debut season, as well as the World Cup with France and the Champions League, Drinkwater ended up being completely forgotten and eventually abandoned his career as a player to work in construction. Schmeichel took an interesting path by going to Nice, where he didn't last, and then moved to Celtic. Mahrez was bought by Manchester City, where he had a very successful stint, winning the Premier League multiple times again. And Okazaki went to Spain and then also retired. Claudio Ranieri managed to revive his career, and after that he went back to being a coach for short stints, managing a few clubs, collecting a few dismissals until retiring, and then coming out of retirement to save Roma from a horrible 2024 to 2025 season, doing a really great job at the team. However, many farewells were even way more literal than others. In 2018, the then owner of the club passed away after a helicopter accident near Leicester's own stadium. In the year 2024, Craig Shakespeare, who was Ranieri's assistant during this victory and later even became the team's coach, had also left us after a battle with cancer. One by one, the pieces on the board were leaving Leicester in one way or another, until only he was left, just Jamie Vardy. After that magical Premier League title run, Vardy turned down an offer from Arsenal, and it became clear that his combination with Leicester was meant to last. At no point did he abandon the ship. Team members were coming and going, coaches were leaving and joining, and Vardy was the only constant in the team. If there was a Leicester match, you can be sure Jamie Vardy was there, and he kept on scoring goals in the Premier League, becoming a modern legend of the competition, staying with the team even when they got relegated to the second division again. However, another relegation from the Premier League in the 2024 to 2025 season, he decided it was time to take a new direction.
Here he comes for one final time in royal blue.
In an extremely emotional farewell at the King Power Stadium, Vardy said goodbye after 13 years at the club, many goals scored, and of course, a Premier League. The Premier League was won with Vardy's goals under Morgan's leadership, in Conte's lung, on Mahrez's left foot, in Ranieri's motivation, and in a heavy dose of the improbable, the impossible, a wonderful combination that makes this Leicester team, without a doubt, an immortal team.